She sat there silent, watching, waiting, letting him dig his own grave. And the moment she spoke, the whole courtroom knew he had just ruined his entire life. The courtroom was packed. Every seat taken, every eye locked on the man sitting stiffly in the witness stand, Officer Daniel Whitaker. His uniform was crisp, his badge gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and his expression carried the smug confidence of someone who believed the system would always work in his favor. Across the room, at the defense table, Mia Adams sat with her hands folded, her face unreadable. She wasn't fidgeting, wasn't shifting in her seat, wasn't showing a flicker of nerves. She just listened, studied, waiting. The judge, an older man with thinning gray hair, cleared his throat. "Officer Whitaker, you may proceed." Whitaker adjusted his tie and leaned toward the microphone. "On the night in question," he began, voice steady, "I initiated a routine traffic stop on the defendant's vehicle. She was swerving between lanes, so I suspected intoxication. When I approached her window, she was immediately hostile. She refused to provide her license, raised her voice, and became combative. I feared for my safety." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Whitaker continued, "Due to her behavior, I had no choice but to call for backup. She resisted when I asked her to step out of the vehicle, and I had to restrain her to prevent the situation from escalating further." Mia blinked once, just once. At the prosecution table, the district attorney leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, exuding confidence. This case was a slam dunk, at least in his mind. The jury had no reason to doubt a uniformed officer, and Whitaker had delivered his testimony with precision. But Mia's lawyer, Olivia Grant, didn't flinch. She simply tapped her pen against her notepad, waiting for her turn. The judge turned his gaze toward the defense table. "Ms. Grant, do you wish to cross-examine?" Olivia smiled faintly, pushing her chair back as she stood. "I do, Your Honor." She took a step toward the witness stand, flipping through her notes, though she barely needed them. She knew exactly where this was going. "Officer Whitaker," she said, meeting his gaze, "you stated that Ms. Adams refused to provide her license and was behaving aggressively?" "That's correct." "And that you feared for your safety?" "Yes." She tilted her head slightly. "Just so we're clear, you're absolutely certain that's what happened?" Whitaker narrowed his eyes. "I'm not in the habit of making things up, ma'am." Mia finally shifted, crossing one leg over the other, still silent, still watching. Olivia glanced at her client, then back at the officer. She let the silence hang for just a second longer than comfortable. Then she smiled. "That's interesting," she said, stepping back toward her table, "because we have bodycam footage that tells a very different story." But Officer Whitaker didn't know that yet. The night of the traffic stop had been like any other. The roads were quiet, the air heavy with the kind of stillness that makes people drop their guard. Mia Adams had been driving home from a long day, her mind drifting between thoughts of work and the comfort of finally getting some rest. She wasn't speeding. She wasn't swerving, just cruising down a well-lit stretch of highway in Norfolk, Virginia, minutes away from her apartment. Then came the flashing red and blue lights in her rearview mirror. She sighed, gripping the steering wheel. She wasn't worried. She had done nothing wrong. But she had been in the military long enough to know that some situations had nothing to do with right or wrong. She pulled over, put the car in park, and rolled down her window, keeping both hands visible on the wheel. A habit, a necessary one. Seconds later, Officer Daniel Whitaker approached. "License and registration." No greeting, no explanation, just those three clipped words. Mia glanced up at him. Young, mid-30s, sharp jawline, the type who carried himself with the air of someone who liked authority just a little too much. She nodded, keeping her voice calm. "Sure, can I ask why I was pulled over?" Whitaker's eyes narrowed. "Just hand over your license, ma'am." Something in his tone made her pause. It wasn't a request. It was a challenge. She moved slowly, retrieving her wallet from the center console. Her movements were deliberate, measured, as she pulled out her driver's license and registration, handing them over. Whitaker barely glanced at them. "Step out of the vehicle." Mia's brow furrowed. "Excuse me?" "I said step out of the vehicle." There was no reason for this. None. She kept her voice level. "Is there an issue, officer? I don't understand." "You don't need to understand," he snapped. "Step out of the vehicle." Mia exhaled slowly. This wasn't new to her. She had seen situations like this unfold before. A cop with a badge, with power, trying to provoke a reaction. She kept her hands visible as she unbuckled her seatbelt. Then just as she reached for the door handle, Whitaker's hand flew to his holster. "Slowly," he barked. "Hands where I can see them." Mia froze, heart slamming against her ribs. She wasn't moving fast. She wasn't reaching for anything. But in his eyes, she was already a threat. Her fingers curled into her palm as she fought the urge to react, to say something, to defend herself. Instead, she lifted her hands higher, stepping out with careful precision. Whitaker stepped back, one hand still hovering over his gun. "Turn around." Mia's jaw tightened. "For what?" Whitaker pulled out his radio. "Need backup at my location." "Backup? For what?" The weight of the situation sank in. It didn't matter that she was calm. It didn't matter that she had done nothing wrong. Whitaker had already made up his mind about who she was. Mia clenched her teeth and turned, placing her hands behind her head. She knew exactly where this was going, but she also knew something Whitaker didn't. The courtroom air felt thick, charged with something unspoken. Everyone could sense it. That moment before something goes terribly wrong, or before a truth too big to ignore crashes down on those who thought they could get away with a lie. Officer Daniel Whitaker sat on the witness stand, back straight, voice steady. His confidence hadn't wavered, not yet. Across from him, Mia Adams sat at the defense table, her hands clasped together. No visible anger, no sign of nerves, just quiet patience, like a storm waiting for the right moment to break. Judge Leonard Reeves, a no-nonsense man in his early 60s, adjusted his glasses as he glanced at Olivia Grant, Mia's lawyer. "Ms. Grant, are you prepared for cross-examination?" She smiled, small, subtle, but unmistakably sharp. "I am, Your Honor." Whitaker didn't move. His hands rested on his lap, and though he didn't show it, there was an energy behind his eyes, a flicker of something not quite right. He had been on the stand before. He had given testimonies before. But this time was different. This time, the woman sitting across from him wasn't just another defendant, and she wasn't just watching. She was waiting. The jury, 12 men and women of different ages and backgrounds, leaned in slightly. They had listened to Whitaker's testimony, taken in every word, every confident declaration. He was the officer. She was the defendant. That's how these cases usually played out. Except Olivia Grant wasn't moving like a defense attorney who was grasping for straws. She didn't fumble through papers, didn't look for the right words. Instead, she stood with the patience of someone who already knew how this was going to end. She stepped toward the stand. "Officer Whitaker," she began, her tone light, almost conversational. "Let's go over your testimony one more time." Whitaker nodded once. "You stated that Ms. Adams refused to comply when you pulled her over." "Yes." "That she resisted when you asked her to step out of the car." "Correct." "And that for your own safety, you had to call for backup." He squared his shoulders. "Yes." Olivia paused for half a second, then tilted her head slightly. "Are you absolutely sure?" A flicker of irritation passed over Whitaker's face, but he kept his composure. "Yes, ma'am. I wouldn't be saying it under oath if I wasn't sure." That was the moment. The moment the ground beneath him shifted, only he didn't know it yet. But he was about to. The jury was listening. The entire courtroom was hanging onto every word. And Whitaker, in his uniform, in his position of authority, spoke like a man who had never been questioned before. He adjusted his posture, keeping his voice steady. "Ms. Adams was erratic, aggressive. When I asked her to step out of the vehicle, she became hostile, refusing my orders. I had to call for backup to de-escalate the situation." Olivia Grant let the words settle. Then, with the kind of ease that only comes with knowing you have the truth on your side, she folded her arms. "You feared for your safety?" she asked. Whitaker nodded. "That's correct." She raised an eyebrow. Even though Ms. Adams had both hands visible on the wheel? His lips parted for half a second, but then he recovered. She was making sudden movements. Sudden movements. Olivia repeated the words like she was holding them up to the light, looking for cracks. "And those movements justified your hand on your firearm?" Whitaker's jaw tightened. "It's standard protocol." "Standard protocol," she echoed. "So you escalated the situation, called for backup, and then what happened next?" Whitaker exhaled sharply. "When backup arrived, we proceeded with detaining her. She resisted, making it difficult to place her in handcuffs. She refused to cooperate, forcing us to use reasonable force. A few jurors shifted in their seats. Olivia let the silence hang before she spoke again. You're telling this court under oath that Ms. Adams was resisting? Yes. That she fought back? Yes. She turned to the judge. Your Honor, I'd like permission to present new evidence. The judge nodded. Proceed. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as the large screen behind the witness stand flickered on. Olivia walked to the table, pressing a button on the laptop. And then, the footage played. Dashcam, bodycam, 2 angles of the exact moment Officer Whitaker pulled Mia over. The room watched. The jury leaned forward. The footage didn't show Mia swerving between lanes. It didn't show aggression. It showed a woman calmly asking why she had been stopped. It showed an officer cutting her off before she could finish a sentence. It showed his hand hovering over his gun the second she reached for her ID, just as he had ordered. It showed her compliance. No sudden movements, no resistance, no raised voice, just the truth. For the first time, Whitaker shifted. His throat bobbed in a swallow, but he clenched his jaw, refusing to react. The footage continued. Backup arriving. Mia stepping out of the car with slow, deliberate precision, hands up. Then, his voice, clear as day. Turn around. For what? Because I said so. The jury was no longer leaning forward. They were leaning away. And then, the most damning part. The moment Whitaker had sworn under oath had never happened. Mia being slammed against the hood of her car. Mia's voice staying calm even as his grip tightened. Mia saying, I'm not resisting. And then, her being forced into cuffs without cause. The courtroom was silent. Whitaker's face had gone pale. Olivia let the last few seconds play before pausing the video. Then, slowly, she turned back to Whitaker. You said she resisted, she said, her voice quiet, controlled, dangerous. Can you point out the part where that happened? Whitaker's fingers twitched. The footage doesn't capture everything. She let that sit. The courtroom let that sit. Then, Olivia took a slow step forward. Would you like to revise your testimony? Whitaker's breath was shallow now. And Mia Adams? She hadn't moved, because she knew what was coming next, and Whitaker was about to learn exactly who he had lied about. The silence was suffocating. Whitaker's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed, his lips parting slightly, searching for words, an excuse, anything to explain away what had just been played in front of everyone. But there was nothing. The video didn't lie. The jury saw it. The judge saw it. The prosecution saw it. And Mia? She was still sitting completely still. Her expression hadn't changed. No smirk, no satisfaction, just the same quiet patience. Olivia Grant folded her arms, waiting, giving Whitaker the chance to dig himself out of the grave he had so confidently walked into. But instead of speaking, he clenched his fists. He knew there were no words that could fix this. The judge exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. Officer Whitaker, he said, his voice laced with controlled irritation, do you have an explanation for this? Whitaker's mouth opened, then closed. He glanced toward the prosecution table, but the district attorney who had once been so self-assured was now staring at the screen, lips pressed into a hard line. There was no saving him. Olivia let the silence stretch before finally speaking again. You claimed, under oath, that Ms. Adams was aggressive, she said, stepping forward, that she resisted arrest, that you feared for your safety. She gestured toward the screen. Yet everything we just saw tells a very different story. Whitaker shifted uncomfortably, his fingers gripping the edge of the witness stand. The footage doesn't always show the full context. Olivia's eyebrows lifted. Full context? He exhaled sharply, frustration creeping into his tone. Situations like this happen fast. Officers don't always remember things exactly as they happened. We have to make split-second decisions. Olivia nodded, her lips pressing together like she was considering his words. Then she turned, pacing slowly. So, let me get this straight. You, a trained officer of the law, misremembered every key detail of that stop? Whitaker clenched his jaw. The reason for the stop? Olivia continued. Misremembered. More silence. The aggression? She tilted her head. Misremembered. His nostrils flared. The resistance? She let the last word hang. Misremembered. Whitaker's grip on the witness stand was white-knuckled now. You see, Officer Whitaker, Olivia continued, you might be able to convince some people with vague words like misremembered and split-second decisions. But we're not talking about memory. She gestured to the screen. We're talking about evidence, and evidence doesn't lie. A few members of the jury nodded slightly. Others just stared at Whitaker, their faces unreadable. But one thing was clear. The man sitting in the witness stand was no longer the confident officer they had seen moments ago. He was exposed. And then Olivia smiled. Just a little. Now, she said, tapping a single finger on her notepad, let's talk about who exactly you decided to lie about. Whitaker's breath hitched. Mia finally looked up, and when she did, her eyes locked onto his. Not with anger, not with hatred, but with absolute, undeniable power. And that was when he realized he had messed with the wrong person, and the entire courtroom was about to find out why. The shift in the room was palpable. A minute ago, Whitaker had been in control, a trusted officer of the law, giving his testimony with unwavering confidence. Now he was nothing more than a man who had just been caught lying under oath. The judge sighed, turning toward Olivia Grant. Ms. Grant, do you have any further questions for the witness? Olivia barely spared Whitaker another glance. No, Your Honor. She turned, walking back toward the defense table. Then with a quiet, deliberate motion, she placed her hands on Mia's chair and leaned down slightly. Are you ready? She asked softly. Mia didn't answer right away. Instead, she pushed back her chair and stood, slowly. The quiet confidence in her movements was undeniable, unshakable. She walked toward the witness stand, her posture perfect, her expression calm, not forced, not performative, just the kind of control that makes people nervous. As she sat down, the judge glanced at her. State your name for the record. Mia took a slow breath, then spoke. Lieutenant Commander Mia Adams, United States Navy SEAL. The air shifted. The jury blinked. The district attorney stiffened. Whitaker? His entire body tensed. And just like that, the truth crashed over the courtroom like a tidal wave. Mia wasn't just some random civilian. She was a high-ranking officer. A woman who had been trained in tactical warfare, survival, and high-pressure decision-making. A woman who had faced danger in ways that Whitaker could never imagine. And he had lied about her. Mia adjusted the microphone slightly, her fingers barely brushing against the stand. Then, she turned her gaze directly at Whitaker. Her voice was steady, controlled, sharp enough to cut through steel. I have spent my entire career making split-second decisions, she said, each word precise, measured. Not in a courtroom, not on the side of a highway, but in actual combat zones, where the difference between life and death isn't a feeling, it's facts. Whitaker's face drained of color. She didn't blink, didn't falter, just kept her gaze locked onto him as she continued. When I was pulled over that night, I wasn't intoxicated. I wasn't aggressive. I wasn't a threat. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. But Officer Whitaker didn't see me as a person. He saw me as a narrative. The jury was glued to her. She turned slightly, scanning the courtroom. I have served my country for years. I have taken oaths. I have followed rules. I have operated with honor. She let the words settle. But what happened to me that night? Her lips pressed together just briefly. That wasn't about honor. She finally turned back to Whitaker, her eyes locked onto his, like a predator cornering prey. I know what real fear looks like, Officer Whitaker, she said, her voice lowering just slightly. I've seen it in combat. I've seen it on the faces of men who knew they were about to lose everything. Whitaker swallowed hard. She leaned forward, just enough. And right now, you look just like them. The entire courtroom was silent. Whitaker's breath was uneven, and for the first time since this trial began, he had nothing to say. But the consequences were just beginning. The silence stretched, heavy, unrelenting. Whitaker sat frozen. The jury wasn't looking at him like a trusted officer anymore. They were looking at a liar, a man who had abused his power and gotten caught. The judge exhaled, his voice laced with irritation. Officer Whitaker, given the evidence presented and your sworn testimony, I have no choice but to refer your statements for perjury review. Whitaker's face twitched. His confidence was gone. His world was crumbling in real time. The district attorney, who had once looked smug and self-assured, avoided eye contact. The jury members were stone-faced, but Mia? She just sat there, unshaken. The judge turned to Olivia Grant. Ms. Grant, do you have any closing remarks before we proceed? Olivia stood, buttoning her blazer. Just one, Your Honor. She turned toward the jury, hands clasped in front of her. This isn't just about one officer making a mistake, she said. This is about what happens when power is abused, when a trusted individual chooses to fabricate the truth, expecting that no one will question them. She gestured toward the screen, still frozen on the damning bodycam footage. If Ms. Adams weren't who she is, if there were no video, if she had reacted even slightly differently that night, what do you think would have happened? The jury members glanced at each other. They knew the answer. Mia sat back, her arms crossed. She didn't need to say anything. The truth was already loud enough. The judge straightened his glasses. We will adjourn and reconvene for final deliberations. Whitaker didn't move. He was still processing it all. Mia finally spoke, one last time. You pulled me over that night thinking you had power over me. She kept her voice low, controlled. But power isn't about a uniform. It isn't about a badge. It's about truth. She let that hang for just a second longer than necessary. Then, with the same quiet composure she had from the very beginning, she stood up and walked away. Whitaker didn't, because for the first time in his life, he was the one trapped, and there was no one coming to save him. This story isn't just about Mia Adams. It's about every person who has ever been silenced by the system. It's about every time someone was falsely accused and didn't have the proof to fight back. It's about why accountability matters. Too often, people in positions of power think they can lie without consequences, until they meet someone who refuses to stay silent. So ask yourself, how many others like Mia are out there? How many times has this happened where there wasn't a camera rolling? And most importantly, what are we going to do about it? If you believe in accountability, truth, and justice, share this story. Speak up when you see injustice. Because silence? That's exactly what they're counting on. Now tell me, what would you have done if this happened to you?